All right, the next 4 questions are here. Notice that there's always like on the inside, there's a minus 12, plus 4, plus 6, minus 4. So because we're adding or subtracting on the inside, we're going to need to make sure the x is alone, and we might need to factor out a common, factor out the common, not the common term, but the first term here. Now the first one doesn't actually need to be factored because the x is alone, so we're okay with that, which is kind of nice. Now I will do my rule for this. So for the x's, and hopefully you can start to see a pattern as we get faster at this. It says times by 3, so I'll divide by 3. It says minus 4, so I'll add it. And for the y, it says times by negative 2, so I'll do that. Negative 2y, that's timesing, and minus 5. And that's all there is to it. So oftentimes there's a 1 here. It seems to be a little more complicated, but when there's numbers, it's kind of easy. Oh, times 3, divide by 3. Times by 2? Oh, sure, times by 2. So you do the opposite for the x's, and then you leave the outside numbers for exactly what it says for the y's. Now the x, I don't even know my point anymore. I'm going to have to take a look here and write this down. So it's something 6 comma negative 8. I'm going to write that down. 6 comma negative 8. So I put 6 in here. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 2 plus 4 is 6. If I put 8 into here, I'm going to get positive 16. 16 minus 5 is 11. And there's a bunch of transformations. I'll just do this one right now. I don't know if I'll do them all. But let's deal with the horizontal stuff, the x's. So I am dividing by 3, so I'll say it's a compression. Because I'm dividing by 3, I'm making it smaller, so I'm compressing it. Horizontal compression by 3. And we're going right by 4. Because you're adding 4 to the x's. Now for the y's, I'll go like this. The 5 is making me move this thing down. So I'm going to go down by 5. So I write 4 but down 5. And then I'm timesing the y by 2, so I'm making it bigger. There is a negative there, but y is being doubled. So I've got a vertical, that's my y, vertical expansion by 2, because I'm timesing it by 2. And then I also have a vertical flip. So I'm not going to write these down anymore because example 3 has a ton of that stuff. But it's good to keep that in mind. X, I'm dividing by 3, so I'm going to make it smaller. That's a compression. For the y, I'm timesing it by 2. I'm going to expand it. I'm making it bigger. But then there is a negative there, so I have to acknowledge that there's a vertical flip. And then, of course, write 4 down 5. So let's just deal with transforming points, though, and not writing down all of them. So the rule. Oh, I can't even do the rule right now because I have to factor out. So negative a half f plus 3. So I'm going to take out a third. So I have to divide by a third and divide by a third. Because then those will cancel, leaving me just an x. Now 6 divided by a third. Now 6 divided by 3 is 2. This can't be the same. So 6 divided by a third. That's the same thing as going 6 times 3. 6 times 3 is 18. So we can do our rule from this now. We don't have to get the x alone. It's already like that. So for my x, I can transform it. It says times by a third. I will now divide by a third. It says plus 18, so I will minus it. Now for the y's, it's exactly what it says. It says times by a negative a half, so I'll do that, and plus 3. Now this requires a little bit of work because x divided by a third is the same thing as x being times by the 3. Dividing by a third and timesing by 3, same thing. So I'm going to times the x by 3, otherwise known as 3x. And then I've got a minus 18. And then this right here, y times the negative 1 is negative y. And on the bottom, there's just a 2. On the denominator, there's just a 2. And there's a plus 3. So I've got if you want to write this down, you could. I'm not going to, but it's a horizontal. For the horizontal stuff, I'm timesing by 3, so it's an expansion. I have a horizontal expansion by 3, and I minus the 18, so I'm moving it left by 18. So it's a horizontal expansion by 3, and I'm moving left by 18. For y, I've got the vertical flip. I also have, I'm dividing by 2, so I'm making it smaller. So it's a compression. So I've got a vertical compression by 2, but then I'm also raising it up by 3. So it's a vertical flip, a vertical compression by 2, and then up by 3. Now my point, I can take my point, which I don't know what it is again, 6 and negative 8. So put 6 into here. 3 times 6 is 18. 18 minus 18 is 0. And then if I put negative 8 into here, that's going to become a positive 8 over 2, which is 4. 4 plus 3 is 7. So there's a lot. This is a really hard question in terms of what we're asking you to do. There's like, it's not very often that we say divide by a third. Like that's not normal. That's a pretty difficult question to do, because 6 divided by a third, especially without a calculator, you have to just know it's timesing by 3 to get 18. But I would say it's very challenging. I would put a star beside this and say, hey, there's a lot going on in this one. Now for G, again, I can't, the x is not alone here. I have to take this out. So I'm going to have to take out the negative 3. So I'll divide by negative 3 and divide by negative 3. I'll factor that out so that I'm just left with the x, and negative 12 over negative 3 is a plus 4. So my rule for my any point for my x's, we will go, it says times by negative 3, so I'll divide by negative 3. It says add 4, so I'll minus it. And then it says y times by negative 1/2. And so I do that, and it says minus 5, so I minus it. So again, I did exactly what it told me to, times by negative 1/2 and minus, but did the opposite for the x's. Divided by 3 instead of times. This is a times by negative 3, and I divided it. Instead of adding, I subtracted. Now, this could do a little bit more simplifying. This is fine. But this, y times negative 1 is a negative y, and the only thing on the denominator is a 2. And a minus 5. Now the reason I like to do that is for looking at if I'm ever asked to say is it a compression or expansion, I say, well, I'm dividing by 2, I'm making it smaller, so it must have been a compression. So this is a vertical compression. Same with this, it's actually a horizontal compression because I'm dividing it by 3. And they both have flips. And I'm going to move left 4 and down 5. But I don't need to know that for this question, I'm just going to keep going here. So I'm going to take my point, which I've forgotten, 6 and 8. So I put 6 into here. 6 minus 6 over negative 3 is just going to be negative 2. Negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. And then put a negative 8 into here. So that's going to be positive 8 over 2 is 4. 4 minus 5 is negative 1. Okay. And the last one. So I can't have this. I'm going to take that negative 1/3 out. So I need to divide by negative 1/3 and divide by negative 1/3. So then those are gone, leaving just the x. Now 4 divided by 1/3. Now 4 divided by 1/3 is the same thing as timesing by 3. So 4 times 3 is 12, and there's a negative, so it's a negative 12. Now, let's do our rule. So my x is times by negative 1/3, so I will divide by negative 1/3. It says minus 12, so I'll add it. So it did the opposite there. Instead of times, I did divide. Instead of minus, I did add. Now it says for the y, it says times by negative 2, so I'll do that. Negative 2 times y, and it says plus 8. Seems like every one of these, once you get your rule, there's a little bit of simplifying to do. So dividing by 1/3 is the same thing as timesing by 3. So it's 3x, but negative. And there's a plus 12. And then negative 2y plus 8. When you look at this question originally, you'd say, well, look at the x. Your x's are timesing by 1/3, they're getting smaller. But because we're actually dividing by 1/3, we're actually timesing by 3. So it's always nice to look at the rules. It tells you if it's an expansion or compression. So I'm timesing my x by 3, it's an expansion, so I have a horizontal expansion. And I'm timesing my y's by 2, so I actually have a vertical expansion as well. And they're both negative, so I've got some vertical and horizontal flips, and I've got some shifts as well. That's not what I'm being asked. I'll put 6 into here. So that's going to be negative 18 plus 12 is going to be a negative 6. Put a negative 8 into here, which is a positive 16, plus 8 is 24. So there's a lot going on in this question, in these 4 questions. For the next questions, I'm actually not going to write them all down. And I'm not going to be writing down, I'm going to be going over the base function, but I'm not going to be writing down all the different things that are happening. I'll write down the rule and I'll verbally say it, but you need to have, for example 3 right here, you should have your answer key out, the one that I've already given you as a PDF, and you can write these things down in between questions or whatever. So keep that in mind for the next one.